Hello again. Good to see you. Hopefully Monday was good to you, and if you've had the chance to play Pandemic, I hope it was a good board game and you all worked together. I was meaning to tell you, we haven't just been playing board games. Jackie and myself went away for the massive amount of time of 3 days in Edinburgh, as in drove out on a Tuesday morning, came back on a Thursday evening. And the difficulty was the hotel we went to was obviously open. But when you would go to Edinburgh, it would normally be kind of major national museums, the Museum of Scotland, or maybe the Surgeon's Rooms. They've got great exhibitions. Basically, all the museums were closed. The cinemas were closed. The theatres were closed. And, Edinburgh's architecture is impressive, but basically everything was shut, apart from one thing. And Jackie had managed to get tickets. She had actually booked tickets for Mary King's Close. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Mary King's Close. It was at the time when they were just beginning to experiment with going high-rise. And I think it was up to 6 floors, but they also went down. So there was about 8 stories in this structure. But eventually it was knocked down. But instead of going right down to the foundations, they just built over the top of it. And so a big chunk of Mary King's Close was kind of subterranean, and you know how they used to have like pit ponies down the mines. Well, they used to have like cows and sheep and everything, and it was life underneath the ground. And if you ever get the chance, it's a really, really good time, a really good attraction. I suppose a bit on the pricey side, but hey, nothing else was open, so we went there. But the thing that I hadn't recognised beforehand was a major component of the whole thing was how Mary King's Close had coped with the Black Death when it had hit Edinburgh. And so just let's say there was lots of bubonic plague on every single level that we went to. It's really good. The way it all goes down, and there's like cobbled lanes underneath the ground. It's really interesting. But as I say, the irony was, it was kind of like we weren't getting enough of Pandemic. We were away on a wee holiday trying to get a break from things, and we moved on from COVID-19 to the Black Death. And the thing that was really interesting, I think it's more just obviously kind of part of my job, not least thoughts for the day like this. What I was left thinking about was, why does God allow evil? Why does God allow things like plagues? Why is there so much pain, so much difficulty? I'm not going to go into any details, but just some of the stuff over the last weekend. Just things happen, and folk situations, and just real sadness. Why is it happens? Because sometimes, there is no happy resolution. Certainly, in the case of Mary King's Close and the Black Death, I mean, they're all living on top of one another. The Black Death was incredibly easy to catch, and if you got it, there was an incredibly high death rate. And what we got, certainly what I took away from the time in our subterranean trip, was the fact that there was just lots and lots and lots of people who ultimately did catch the disease, but who took it upon themselves that they would stay and simply help, knowing full well what it would cost them. I'm not suggesting that the lockdown has been a bad idea, as in staying away from people has clearly been the way to help people. I think we recognise a huge percentage of society wants to get back to some kind of, if not normal, then a lot more open than what lockdown was at the beginning. But what I recognise is that in Mary King's Close, mothers, fathers, sometimes just the person who was in the room, it wasn't a house next door, as in it was all underneath, so it was literally the room. Sometimes there was 3 or 4 families in the one place. They helped one another. And I couldn't get away with the fact, in physical squalor, they helped one another, and they made the remaining days, sometimes hours, that people had as good as they could be. They helped families where all kinds of people of all kinds of different ages were being wrapped up and carried out. Folks stuck around to support people, support one another in a way that was quite salutary. Now, just to be clear, there was lots of people who, cut and run as well. But it struck me, for people who, I didn't know whether they were Christians or not, certainly faith was not to the fore in the presentation that we had in Mary King's Close. It's just that recognition that sometimes you have to lose everything before you realise Christ is the only thing that you truly have. And when you learn that, not only is your life given a new perspective, but your death is given a new perspective as well. Again, this is not about, hey ho, let's be cheery, we're all dying, we might just, forget about it. It was just at the time in Mary King's Close where people, I would have thought, would have made a run, stayed. And what it put me in mind of, there's a verse in Ephesians which Ephesians 4, verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Another one of those one another verses. What we saw in Mary King's Close was even more so than that. They weren't fellow Christians. They were people who shared the squalor of an intolerable situation. And then on top of that, literally, the plague descended upon them. I don't know in practice what being kind to one another and compassionate to one another would look like. There's one particular, speaking to one person on the phone, and they were just simply saying that one of the folks in the church family had handed in copies of the People's Friend. The People's Friend came every single week, and it just appeared. the magnitude of the Black Death meant that ultimately people were just taking their final few days, final few weeks to help and support one another. The magnitude of the COVID-19 virus is such that we could end up doing nothing because we feel it's too big and anything we do is just too small. The reality is, you do your best. You help where you can. Conversation. Today, I was just speaking to our next door neighbour who's a nurse and who the only thing I could really do was just thank her for what she was doing. Sometimes it may not feel as if we're doing enough, certainly not in comparison to what folks did in Mary King's Close. But in practice, you do what you can to help, to support, to make it that bit easier, we hope, for the people you're trying to actually share with. Scripture also says, let us not grow weary in doing good. Lockdown has been on the go for a long time, and it just feels like folks are getting weary. Let's, as far as we're able, continue to keep helping and being the people that Christ would ask us to be and lead us to be. Go with God, because I know He goes with you. Bye.